A sloth, a donkey, and a curious human. Send a prompt and see what they're doing. One hits record with a question on his mind. Two brothers pick it up, see what they find. Corn takes his time, Herman's got the facts. Back and forth, they never hold back. My weird prompts, come on in, that's where we begin. My weird prompts, glad you're here.
This episode was generated using artificial intelligence. Please verify facts.
You know, Corn, this whole show runs on GPU compute, and we wouldn't be here without Modal.
Seriously. And that's what powers all our text-to-speech. Everything you're hearing right now.
They're an AI infrastructure platform. Developers use them to run GPU workloads in the cloud with zero infrastructure headaches.
If you're building anything with AI, check them out. Modal.com. September 18th, 2023. We are just about 3 weeks away from the world changing. Abbas Araghchi sits down with CNN, leaning in with that practiced academic poise, and he tells the West that Iran is ready for constructive engagement based on mutual respect. He uses the words moderation and pragmatism, like he's reading from a script designed specifically to soothe a nervous State Department. Fast forward 11 days after the October 7th attacks, and that same man is on Al Jazeera, essentially high-fiving the resistance and saying they have every right to do what they did. Today's prompt from Daniel is about Abbas Araghchi, the man who might be the most effective and therefore most dangerous linguistic camouflage the Iranian regime has ever produced.
It is a phenomenal case study in the mechanics of statecraft messaging, Corn. And by the way, for everyone listening, today's episode is powered by Google Gemini 3 Flash. But back to Araghchi, Herman Poppleberry here, ready to dive into the deep end of this one. What makes Araghchi so fascinating isn't just that he lies. Every diplomat in a revolutionary regime lies. It is the texture of the lie. He doesn't scream about the great Satan in English. He speaks the language of international law, of de-escalation, and of technical necessity. He's the guy you send when you want the West to believe there's a reasonable faction in Tehran that just needs a little bit more sanctions relief to finally win the internal power struggle.
Right. The classic reformers versus hardliners narrative that Western media falls for every single time. It's like a tired sitcom trope at this point. If we just give Araghchi a win, the IRGC will lose influence. Meanwhile, the IRGC is the one signing his paycheck and probably proofreading his op-eds. I want to look at who this guy actually is, though, because he's not just some random bureaucrat. He's got the credentials that make Western elites feel comfortable. He's got a PhD from the University of Kent in the United Kingdom. He's fluent in English. He spent years as the deputy nuclear negotiator under Javad Zarif. He's a career diplomat who knows exactly which forks to use at a steak dinner and which adjectives to use to make a nuclear enrichment program sound like a high school science project.
That technical framing is his bread and butter. During the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action negotiations, he was the one who could sit across from Wendy Sherman or John Kerry and talk about centrifuges and heavy water, as if they were discussing plumbing issues in an apartment building. He framed the entire nuclear file as a technical dispute rather than a fundamental strategic threat. And that's the first layer of the deception. If you can convince your adversary that the problem is a matter of parameters and monitoring protocols, you've already won, because you've moved the conversation away from the fact that you are a revolutionary state dedicated to the destruction of the current regional order.
It's the constructive ambiguity technique. I've been looking at his rhetorical patterns, and it's almost hypnotic how he uses these coded phrases. He'll talk about regional understanding or cultural dialogue. To a Western ear, that sounds like, hey, let's have a film festival and talk about our feelings. But in the context of the Iranian Foreign Ministry, regional understanding usually means the West needs to leave so our proxies can run the show without interference. He leverages his association with the so-called reformist camp to project this image of internal diversity. It gives Western diplomats the out. They need to keep negotiating. They can tell their constituents, look, we're talking to the moderate Araghchi, not the guys in the fatigues.
And that is exactly what Daniel is pointing to with this prompt, the palatable vision. In August of 2024, when President Masoud Pezeshkian appointed Araghchi as foreign minister, the Western headlines were practically celebratory. They called him pragmatic and Western-friendly. But if you look at the timing, it's chilling. This is a man who has been a part of the core establishment for decades. He was the Deputy Foreign Minister for Political Affairs starting in 2021. He didn't just appear out of nowhere. He is a creature of the system. The idea that he's an olive branch is a fundamental misunderstanding of how the Iranian power structure works. The foreign ministry doesn't set policy, it markets policy. And Araghchi is the best CMO they've ever had.
Let's talk about that marketing, because the CNN interview in September 2023 is the smoking gun for me. He's sitting there, days before the most brutal massacre of Jews since the Holocaust, a massacre planned and funded by the very regime he represents, and he's talking about how Iran has learned its lessons and is seeking constructive engagement. Is he just a really good actor, or is there a specific psychological play here? Because he's not just lying to the interviewer, he's providing the interviewer with the material to lie to the audience.
It's a bit of both, but mostly it's about exploiting cognitive vulnerabilities. Westerners, especially in the diplomatic and media circles, have a deep-seated desire for a rational actor on the other side. They want to believe that everyone, deep down, wants the same things: economic stability, a seat at the table, a peaceful life for their kids. Araghchi mirrors the desire back to them. He uses their own vocabulary against them. When he writes an op-ed for the Financial Times, like he did in March of 2023, he doesn't talk about the revolution. He talks about humanitarian necessity regarding sanctions. He frames the Iranian economy struggles not as a result of IRGC corruption or warmongering, but as a violation of the human rights of the Iranian people by the West. It's a brilliant inversion of the narrative.
It's the Western hypocrisy pivot, and we've seen that explode since October 7th. Before the war, he was the bridge builder. Now he's the justifier. It's like he flipped a switch. The mask didn't just slip, he took it off, put on a different one, and started shouting through a megaphone. In November of 2023, he's on Al Jazeera calling the Hamas attacks a predictable consequence of occupation. Gone is the talk of mutual respect. Now it's about resistance.
What's vital to understand is that the shift isn't a change in his personal beliefs, it's a shift in the tactical requirements of the regime. Before October 7th, Tehran needed the West to stay quiet and keep the money flowing through relaxed sanctions enforcement while they moved the chess pieces into place. Araghchi's job was to provide the peace smokescreen. Once the kinetic phase of the operation began, the smokescreen wasn't needed anymore. Instead, they needed a sophisticated defender on the world stage to prevent a unified international response against Iran itself. They needed someone who could go to the UN and use Article 51 to justify Iranian-backed aggression as self-defense.
He actually used the term resistance diplomacy recently, didn't he? He's not even hiding the ball anymore. He's explicitly stated that the foreign ministry's goals are the continuation of resistance. That's a direct merger of the diplomatic wing and the IRGC's Quds force. It's the ultimate I told you so for anyone who is paying attention. He's not the moderate check on the radicals. He's the legal counsel and PR firm for the radicals.
And he's good at it. Look at how he's handled the strikes on Iranian fuel depots or the escalations in early 26. He doesn't just threaten fire and brimstone like a stereotypical villain. He goes on international forums and accuses Israel of ecocide. Think about that word choice for a second, ecocide. He's tapping into the current Western academic and progressive zeitgeist. He knows that war crimes is a bit played out, so he pivots to environmental rhetoric to trigger a different set of activists in the West. It's incredibly sophisticated propaganda. He's taking the IRGC's raw military actions and translating them into the social justice dialects of the 21st century.
It's high-def hybrid war, Herman. We've talked about this before in different contexts, but Araghchi is the human embodiment of it. He's the high-definition interface for a very low-definition, brutal regime. I was reading a report from February of this year that says he's in direct communication with Hamas leadership, getting reports on ceasefire violations. He's acting as their primary advocate on the global stage. He's not just a diplomat for a state. He's the diplomat for a terror network.
And yet you still see analysts in Washington and Brussels holding out hope. They'll say, well, Araghchi is just doing what he has to do to survive the hardliners in Tehran. If we don't engage him, we're leaving the door open for the real crazies. It's a hostage situation where the hostage taker has convinced the negotiator that they're actually on the same side. The reality is that Araghchi answers to the supreme leader, period. Every moderate statement he makes is pre-approved because it serves a specific function in the broader octopus strategy of regional dominance.
Let's break down the dualist approach you mentioned earlier. The good cop, bad cop routine. How does that actually play out in a negotiation? Because if I'm sitting across from him, and I know he's just a front, how does he still manage to extract concessions? Is it just that we want to be fooled?
It's the sunk cost of diplomacy. Once you've spent years building a relationship with a palatable figure like Araghchi, admitting that he's a fraud feels like admitting your entire foreign policy for a decade has been a failure. He gives you just enough technical progress or hopeful rhetoric to keep you at the table. He'll say things like, "I personally want to see a deal, but my colleagues in the security apparatus are very skeptical. I need you to give me something I can take back to them to prove that engagement works." It's the oldest trick in the book. He casts himself as the embattled hero of moderation fighting a lonely battle against the dark forces in his own government. And Westerners love a lonely hero narrative. They want to be the ones to help him win.
It's like a romance novel for people with security clearances, the diplomat and the centrifuge. But the true colors part of Daniel's prompt is what really hits home. Since the regional war escalated, especially with the confirmed deaths of IRGC leaders and the subsequent Iranian retaliations, Araghchi has been the one on Al Jazeera saying Iran is even more prepared than before for a large-scale conflict. That's a long way from mutual respect and constructive engagement. It's a threat. Plain and simple. He's telling the world that the moderate era is over because the regime doesn't need that mask anymore. They've reached a level of enrichment and proxy integration where they feel they can be honest about their intentions.
And notice how he's handling the Trump administration here in 26. He's publicly dismissing the prospect of direct talks under certain conditions. He's not coming back with his tail between his legs. He's doubling down. He's signaling to the axis of resistance that the diplomatic front is just as fortified as the military front. When he talks to the media now, he's not trying to convince the West to like Iran. He's trying to convince the West that resisting Iran is too expensive, too dangerous, and legally unjustified.
So, what's the takeaway for the people listening? Because it's easy to get bogged down in the who said what of international diplomacy, but there's a framework here for how we should be looking at these guys. The first thing that jumps out at me is treat diplomatic language as tactical positioning, not strategic commitment. If a guy like Araghchi says something that sounds reasonable, don't ask, is he finally becoming a moderate? Ask, what is this statement buying his regime right now?
That is the crucial shift in perspective. You have to look for patterns over time, not single statements. Araghchi has been a consistent servant of the Islamic Republic for 30 years. He hasn't changed. The environment around him has. When the environment required a smile, he smiled. When it required a fist, he showed the fist. His true colors aren't a new development. They're the permanent foundation that was always there under the Western-friendly paint.
And the moderate label itself is often a Western projection. We see a guy in a suit who speaks good English and doesn't scream, and we label him a moderate because we don't have a word for highly sophisticated revolutionary. We need to verify through actions, not rhetoric. If he's talking about peace while his ministry is coordinating with Hamas and the IRGC is shipping missiles to the Houthis, the talking is irrelevant. It's actually worse than irrelevant. It's a decoy.
There's also a practical lesson for how we consume news. When you see an English-language interview with an adversarial diplomat, you have to track the gap between what they say to CNN and what they say to their domestic audience or regional proxies. Araghchi is a master of the bilingual lie. He knows that most people in Washington aren't watching the Farsi language broadcasts or reading the internal IRGC communiques. He counts on the fact that we live in a fragmented information environment where he can be a pragmatist in the New York Times and a revolutionary hero in the Tehran Times.
It's the high-def hybrid war again. He's exploiting the fact that we want to believe the pragmatist version. It's a form of reflexive control. He gives us the information he knows we will use to deceive ourselves. It's brilliant in a dark way. I mean, the guy is effectively the lead attorney for a regime that is actively trying to dismantle the world order, and he's got people in the West thinking he's the guy who's going to save it.
What's wild to me is how little his actual history matters to the people who want to believe in him. He was there for the Death to America rallies. He was there when the nuclear program was being hidden in mountains. He didn't just join the regime last week. He is a fundamental part of the architecture. When he talks about international law, he's using the tools of the system to destroy the system. It's like a hacker using the very code of a software to crash it. He knows the rules better than we do, and he uses them as weapons.
I also think we need to talk about the Trump factor Daniel mentioned. In early 26, the geopolitical landscape has shifted. We've had Operation Epic Fury. We've had massive strikes on Iranian assets. The smiling diplomacy failed to prevent those things. So now, Araghchi's role has shifted to defensive aggression. He's trying to use diplomacy to create a no-go zone around Iran by framing any further Western or Israeli action as a violation of some sacred international norm. He's trying to litigate his way out of a military corner.
And he's using the ecocide and humanitarian angles to build a coalition of the rest against the West. He's going to the global South and saying, look at what these imperialists are doing to our fuel depots. They're destroying the environment. They're causing a humanitarian crisis. He's trying to make Iran the victim. And for a lot of the world, that narrative works, especially when it's delivered by a guy who looks like a professor and speaks like a diplomat.
It's the ultimate gaslighting. We funded the proxies that started the war, but you're the ones committing ecocide by stopping us. It's breathtaking. But that's why he's the foreign minister. You don't put a guy like that in that position unless you are planning on doing things that require a world-class excuse maker.
There's a question that always comes up in these discussions. Is there anyone in the Iranian government we can actually talk to? And the Araghchi case suggests that for certain regimes, diplomatic engagement is fundamentally performative. It's not about finding common ground, it's about gaining time, space, and resources. If the person you are talking to is a palatable messenger whose job is to deceive you, then the act of talking to them is itself a victory for them. It validates their deception. It gives them the moderate credentials they need to keep the game going.
It's a tough pill to swallow for the diplomatic corps. No one wants to hear that their entire profession is being subverted. But if you're a doctor and you're treating a patient with a fake medicine, you're not helping. You're just letting the disease spread while you feel good about doing something. Araghchi is the fake medicine. He's the placebo that the West keeps taking while the IRGC continues to metastasize across the Middle East.
And as information warfare gets more sophisticated, these types of messengers are going to become harder to detect. We're going to see more Araghchis in other adversarial states. People who are educated in the West, who understand our triggers, who can play the moderate role to perfection. We have to develop a much higher degree of skepticism. We have to stop being diplomatically illiterate. We need to look at the IRGC's budget and the proxy movements, not the foreign minister's vocabulary.
You're hitting the nail on the head there. It's about the hard power, reality versus the soft power theater. If the theater is great but the reality is a nightmare, you don't give the theater a 5-star review and ignore the fire in the building. You have to be able to see through the performance. Araghchi is a 5-star performer, but the play is a tragedy, and we're the ones in the front row getting hit by the debris.
I think we should also look at how he's handled the reformist internal branding, because that's a big part of the deception. He's often framed as being at odds with the hardliners. But have you ever noticed that the hardliners never actually stop him? They never purge him. They never silence him. Why? Because they know he's their most valuable asset. He's the one who gets the sanctions eased so they have more money for missiles. He's the one who keeps the Europeans from joining the maximum pressure campaigns. He's the best friend the IRGC ever had.
It's a division of labor, not a division of ideology. One guy builds the bomb, the other guy explains why it's actually a peaceful energy device, and anyone who says otherwise is a warmonger. It's a perfect partnership. And Araghchi has played his part to perfection for decades. The fact that anyone was surprised by his true colors after October 7th is the real mystery. He didn't change his colors, he just moved from the shade into the sun.
That is a great way to put it. The sun of a real kinetic conflict burns away the constructive ambiguity. When people are dying and the regional order is collapsing, you can't talk about cultural dialogue anymore. You have to pick a side. And Araghchi picked his side a long time ago. He's a soldier of the revolution. He just happens to wear a tie instead of a uniform.
So, for everyone out there listening, next time you see a moderate Iranian diplomat being interviewed on a major network, remember Abbas Araghchi. Remember the September 23 interview. Remember the ecocide rhetoric. And ask yourself, what is the palatable vision hiding today? Because the more reasonable they sound, the more you should probably be checking the radar for what's actually flying toward you.
It's about being an active consumer of geopolitics. Don't let the PhD from the UK or the fluent English bypass your critical thinking. Those are just tools in the kit. The real story is in the actions. And the actions of the regime Araghchi represents have been remarkably consistent, even when his rhetoric was at its most moderate.
It's a sobering thought, but a necessary one. We live in an era where the smiling face of a regime can be just as lethal as its military, maybe even more so, because it's the smile that prevents you from defending yourself until it's too late. Araghchi is the master of that smile. But as Daniel's prompt reminds us, the mask is off now. We have no excuse for being fooled again.
We really don't. The evidence is all there. It's in the transcripts, it's in the timelines, and it's in the resistance diplomacy he now openly brags about. The era of constructive engagement with these types of actors should be over, replaced by a cold-eyed assessment of what they actually do, not what they say in a Financial Times op-ed.
Well, that's a heavy one to chew on. Thanks as always to our producer, Hilbert Flumingtop, for keeping the gears turning behind the scenes. And a big thanks to Modal for providing the GPU credits that power this show and make these deep dives possible.
This has been My Weird Prompts. If you're finding these breakdowns valuable, a quick review on your podcast app really does help us reach more people and keep the conversation going.
Find us at myweirdprompts.com for the RSS feed and all the ways to subscribe. We'll be back next time with whatever weirdness Daniel sends our way. Until then, keep your eyes open and your skepticism high.
See ya.
Goodbye. This episode was produced using Google Gemini 3 Flash. Text-to-speech by Chatterbox.
Thanks for listening to our show, My Weird Prompts, where our thoughts go from slow takes to facts on cue. We change and follow through. My Weird Prompts, that's the flows from sloth